The door was open. I just went back and reread my speech on the floor because the gentleman, I hadn't done that yet. I went back and reread my speech on the floor. Not stand by every word of that speech. And in it, I referenced the fact that I had just a few months prior had been in agreement with some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle with respect to January 6th, which there's disagreements on our side of the aisle on some of that with respect to the votes at the time. And that I'd taken very strong disagreement and sought apology from our colleague on our side of the aisle about some of the remarks that were said, but felt that this was not the right path to go down.
The House chamber was already on edge when Ilhan Omar rose to speak. Her voice carried conviction as she spoke of injustice, oppression, and what she called deep-rooted prejudice in American politics. But behind her calm exterior, many lawmakers saw something else. Another attempt to deflect accountability for her past controversial remarks. Chip Roy sat quietly, his eyes fixed on her. Each word Omar delivered seemed to heighten the tension in the room. Everyone could feel it. Something was about to break. What began as a routine discussion was turning into one of the most explosive confrontations in recent congressional history. When Chip Roy finally stood to respond, the atmosphere shifted instantly. His calm, yet commanding presence drew silence across the chamber. Without theatrics, he began to dismantle Omar's claims piece by piece, accusing her of using emotion as a shield to mass division. He reminded the House that leadership isn't built on victimhood. It's built on principle, on truth, and on the courage to face consequences. Roy's words cut deep. He cited moments when Omar's rhetoric had alienated allies, fueled division, and turned debate into personal crusade. His tone never rose, yet every word landed with precision, controlled, deliberate, and devastatingly effective.
Thank you for holding this very important hearing. I'm no stranger to discrimination, hate speech, or threats of violence against my family and myself simply because of my identity. As a Black, visibly Muslim woman who came to this country as a refugee, I have dealt with racist, xenophobic, bigoted comments and threats.
Feeling cornered, Ilhan Omar struck back with fiery passion. She accused Chip Roy of being part of the establishment, the same system, she said, that refuses to hear or understand marginalized voices. Her frustration spilled into anger as she labeled Roy a symbol of privilege and hypocrisy. The chamber erupted. Gasps rippled across the hall as the words echoed through the microphones. What might have energized her base instead stunned many of her colleagues. In that instant, it was clear Omar had crossed a line, one that couldn't be walked back after being spoken before the entire nation. The reaction was immediate. Lawmakers shouted over one another as Chip Roy demanded decorum. The speaker's gavel slammed again and again, calling for order, but the tension was uncontrollable. This was no longer a debate. It had become a public implosion of professionalism on the House floor. Reporters rushed to capture every detail, aware they were witnessing a defining political moment. Roy supporters accused Omar of disrespecting Congress itself, while her defenders claimed she was being unfairly targeted. But one fact was undeniable. The atmosphere was electric, volatile, unpredictable, and no one in that chamber could say what would happen next.
Mr. Speaker, we've heard from my colleagues the reasons why the Representative Omar should be removed from this committee, but I feel like all the reasons have not just yet been stated, which is why I rise to add for the record. We've heard about the comments that were made regarding anti-Semitism and anti-Israeli views, but I rise to add to the record that as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I've sat there and heard the representative actually spew anti-American rhetoric as well. I've been in that committee room where the representative equates Israel and the United States to Hamas and the Taliban. Absolutely unacceptable for a member of that committee. I've also heard the representative equate that it is the United States' fault that there is turmoil in Venezuela.
When order was finally restored, Chip Roy rose to deliver the speech that would come to define his career. The room fell still. His expression was steady, his tone measured, but every word carried weight. One by one, he outlined a timeline of Ilhan Omar's most controversial statements. From her remarks following 9/11 to her sharp criticisms of U.S. foreign policy, Roy made it clear. This was not about race, faith, or origin. It was about accountability, about whether the standards of Congress still meant something. His voice strengthened with each point. If we can't hold ourselves to a higher standard, he said firmly, how can we expect the American people to trust us? The words struck like a gavel themselves. Precise, undeniable, impossible to ignore. Each sentence built upon the last, turning his speech into a moment of reckoning. By the time he finished, even Omar's closest allies appeared unsettled. The chamber sat in heavy silence. It wasn't anger that filled the room anymore. It was realization. Something historic had just occurred. In the minutes that followed, the shift was unmistakable. Lawmakers who had once spoken in Omar's defense began quietly stepping back, exchanging uneasy glances. What had begun as an argument over words had evolved into a debate over the very integrity of the institution itself. Behind closed doors, quiet conversation started. Some wondered aloud whether Omar's repeated controversies had finally reached a breaking point. For years, she had survived criticism and political storms with resilience. But this time was different. The isolation around her was almost tangible, as though the room itself had turned cold. Even her allies hesitated, unsure whether they could still defend what had just unfolded before the entire nation.
I associate myself and do with all the remarks the gentleman from South Carolina. I have very strong disagreement with a lot of the statements that Representative Omar has made. We've covered most of them. That some people did something is the one that really sticks in my craw pretty strongly. Raises a whole lot of flags for me. I think there are significant amount of justifications to raise issues with respect to service on the Foreign Affairs Committee, but I would not go down this road. But I'm also reminded, in August of 1993, Juan Gonzalez was a batter for the Texas Rangers and was plunked by Alex Fernandez from the White Sox. And just a little bit later, Robin Ventura came to the plate for the White Sox, and Nolan Ryan was on the mound. And Robin knew what was about to happen. Nolan plunked him. And then Robin Ventura charged the mound, and then Nolan Ryan beat the crud out of him on the mound. That's what happened. We all know that's what happened. It's old school baseball. Nolan Ryan defined old school baseball. This is raw politics. That's what this is. When the doors opened, then there's a question, and you have to decide what you're going to do. We're not going to unilaterally disarm. Just not going to do it. I'm tired of that. It just is what it is. Guys took a shot at someone on our team, about statements I disagreed with, and took very much to task. But I've got strong disagreements with Representative Omar. I would prefer, if it were just starting from scratch, I would not choose this path. I'd just say whatever stuff you all want to say. We'll say whatever stuff we want to say. Our managers will pick our team. Let's go battle it out in committee. That's what I would say. I would say that's the right place to be. But at this point in time, it is my considered judgment that, like Nolan Ryan, we've got to respond. And I'm just going to be blunt and honest about it. That's just my belief.
The following day, Congress reconvened under a wave of national attention. Cameras lined the chamber. Commentators filled the airwaves. And the question on everyone's mind was simple. Would there be consequences? The nation waited as lawmakers filed in, their expressions solemn, their conversations hushed. Chip Roy wasted no time. Taking the floor, he argued that Ilhan Omar's remarks had crossed a line that no member of Congress should ever approach. His tone was steady, not vindictive, as he laid out his case. If we allow personal attacks to go unpunished, he said, then this body loses its moral authority to govern. It was a clear, forceful message. Standards matter, even for those who make the laws. The debate that followed was fierce. Some warned that punishing Omar could set a dangerous precedent, one that might chill free speech or deepen political divides. Others countered that failing to act would send a message of weakness to the American people. The room was split, voices rising and falling in tense exchanges, but the momentum toward discipline was unmistakable. The institution itself seemed to demand resolution. When Ilhan Omar finally rose to speak, all eyes turned to her. Her voice carried a mix of defiance and exhaustion as she insisted she was being singled out not for what she said, but for who she was. She spoke again of her journey, the refugee camps, the barriers she overcame, the voices she sought to represent. For a moment, it felt familiar, the same passion that had once inspired so many. But this time, something had changed. The words didn't land with the same power. The chamber stayed silent, not out of respect, but fatigue. Lawmakers listened without reaction, their faces unreadable. The emotion that once moved her colleagues now sounded like a plea to salvage what was left. Omar's final defense didn't echo conviction anymore. It echoed resignation. Deep down, she seemed to understand that her standing, and perhaps her influence, had already slipped beyond repair.
That is not because of the oppressive socialist and communism that has spread throughout Central and South America and Venezuela at the hands of the Maduro and Hugo Chavez regimes. That is unacceptable. And as a New York representative, to hear the representative belittle, to try to diminish the worst terrorist attack on United States soil on September 11, 2001, as some people did something, that is unacceptable as well. And I hold the same standard for this side of the aisle that I do the other, because when another colleague on my side said something about 9/11, I also voted to have her removed from the Education Committee because I thought that was inappropriate. So I'm being consistent here, and I hope my colleagues will do the same to show that this is about consistency and accountability, because we should not have an individual with those views on the committee that is tasked with representing our country and our Congress to foreign nations. I yield back.
When the speaker finally called for a vote, the nation held its breath. Cameras swept across the House chamber as each name was read aloud, one by one, voices echoing through the hall. The result was decisive. Ilhan Omar was officially removed from her committee assignments, marking one of the most stunning falls from power in recent memory. Applause broke out from Chip Roy's side of the aisle, while others sat in silent disbelief. The moment was more than political. It was symbolic. It sent a clear message that no member of Congress, regardless of influence or identity, stands above accountability. In that instant, the era of unchecked rhetoric appeared to end, replaced by a renewed call for integrity within the nation's most powerful institution. In the days that followed, the fallout was relentless. News outlets replayed the confrontation on loop, dissecting every exchange, every expression. Commentators debated whether the decision represented justice or overreach. Some hailed Chip Roy as a voice of courage who defended principle over politics. Others condemned the outcome as an act of silencing a dissenting voice. But beyond the headlines and partisan noise, one truth stood firm. This was a defining moment for Congress, a reminder that words still matter, and that leadership carries consequences. The clash between Roy and Omar would go down not just as a political battle, but as a turning point in modern congressional history, the day accountability returned to the House floor.
And I hope we'll get through this. We'll kind of hip check each other. Maybe we can sit down and figure out by the end of this Congress, next Congress, whoever's in charge, we figure out how we're going to play ball going forward and set those rules. And I would say the same thing about open rules, closed rules, structured rules. And the ranking member could scoff. We've had X number of votes. We'll have continued debate about this stuff over time. There will be closed rules. There will be structured rules. There will be open rules. I'd like to have that debate. I'd like to have the considered judgment of the ranking member on that, and as I have debate on my side of the aisle. I'm just saying that we can figure out how to protect this institution and try to decide how to do things the right way. But in this instance, I'm going to be very open and honest about why I'm going to vote for this resolution. That's why. Again, recognizing the statements that the representative has made, I find to be highly problematic, extremely concerning, raising very serious questions from a foreign affairs perspective, as the ranking member has raised about statements made and how he feels about people being on certain committees over here.
Gentlemen,
I think we should, in my opinion, we should withdraw from that battle going forward and then let each manager pick their team. And I'll be glad to yield to the gentleman from Colorado.
And I would simply say I appreciate Mr. Roy's honesty. I mean, and again, kind of similar to what Mr. Massey said previously, and not to belabor the point, because I think you've already conceded this, but why not emulate the same resolution that was used in the past?
Within hours of the vote, newsrooms across the country lit up with breaking headlines. Every major network replayed the tense exchange between Chip Roy and Ilhan Omar, frame by frame, dissecting each word and gesture. Analysts debated fiercely. Was this accountability in action or a step too far? On social media, the confrontation ignited into a national conversation. Hashtags supporting both sides trended for days as Americans weighed in on what true responsibility should look like inside Congress. For Ilhan Omar, the spotlight that had once elevated her to national prominence now became an unforgiving storm she couldn't escape. The public reaction was swift and unrelenting. Many voters argued that she had crossed a line long ago, using her influence to divide rather than to unite. Overnight, the tone around her name shifted from admiration to scrutiny, from defense to disappointment. Meanwhile, Chip Roy emerged as a new symbol of principle and restraint. Supporters praised him for upholding the dignity of Congress when others remained silent. Even within Democratic circles, quiet murmurs began to surface, whispers questioning whether Omar's conduct had left lasting damage on their party's image. What had started as a debate over ideology had transformed into something far more personal, a debate over character. As the controversy swelled, it reached beyond Capitol Hill. The White House was eventually forced to address the uproar, with reporters pressing for a response. In a carefully worded statement, the administration called for respect, civility, and accountability from all members of Congress, a subtle acknowledgement of the deep divisions now exposed before the entire nation. What had begun as a single confrontation on the House floor had grown into a reckoning for American politics. A reminder that in the age of instant headlines, every word carries weight, and every moment can reshape a legacy.
Calling this something that it is not in terms of the due process language. That's the part that I just didn't understand, because if it doesn't provide due process, why,
so
as you said, it's partisan, it's not. And again, I appreciate the honesty on that front, and obviously the past presidents that you cited and the rest. But
I don't want to interrupt.
No.
Yeah, I would just say, agreeing with the gentleman from Kentucky, putting something in the whereas clauses, outlining I think, genuine statement by the speaker on our side or whatever, saying that would be taken into consideration and viewed is something. It is something. It is not, I will be very clear, due process in the way we mean it in court. This is not a court. This is not due process in that sense. The question here is what we're going to do as members to afford each other the opportunity to speak, be heard. I'm much more in the favor of let each other speak and be heard, and go use your First Amendment rights to go say why you think that person said something crazy or disagreeable. I would prefer to be in that space. I have no problem with that language being in the whereas clauses. I'm not going to go trumpet it as some grand amount of due process. It's something. It's something in there, and I'd hang my hat on it and say, yeah, go argue the ethics and make the claim. But that's not what this is about. I mean, let's just be clear.
Behind the scenes, unease was spreading through Washington. Senior officials, aides, and strategists quietly admitted that the confrontation had changed everything. What began as a debate over ethics had spiraled into a spectacle, one that pulled national attention away from policy and squarely onto political warfare. Inside the Capitol, conversations grew tense. Chip Roy's message of accountability had struck a nerve so deep that even the highest offices in government were forced to confront the uncomfortable truth. Public trust in leadership was eroding, and the nation could feel it. Days later, Ilhan Omar reemerged, not on the House floor, but in front of a television camera. The interview was emotional, almost vulnerable. Gone was the fiery defiance. In its place, a quieter tone of reflection. She spoke of being misunderstood, of the exhaustion that comes from constant scrutiny, and of her commitment to representing those who feel unheard in the halls of power. Yet, despite her sincerity, the response was muted. For many viewers, the damage had already been done. Every word she spoke was weighed against her past statements, every expression analyzed for intent. What she hoped would be a moment of redemption became instead a portrait of a politician struggling to regain the trust she had once commanded. In living rooms across America, people watched, some with sympathy, others with skepticism. The image of Ilhan Omar had shifted once again, and this time, it was unclear whether she would ever fully recover.
Ryan Plunk's Ventura for a reason. And I yield back.
Gentlelady from Indiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You know what gets me fired up? When people pretend that what's happening in Washington is just politics as usual. Because what we saw in that chamber, what we heard in that moment, wasn't just another speech. It was a raw, unfiltered reckoning. A moment of truth from someone who's seen how deep the rot really goes. Let's break it down, because what he said mattered, and what it meant mattered even more. We had a representative from Texas, standing tall, cutting through the noise. This wasn't just about Ilhan Omar's comments or her seat on a committee. This was about something far bigger, about a door that was kicked open years ago, and now, finally, people are walking through it with eyes wide open and resolve clenched in their fists. Chip Roy laid it out plain as day. He said the precedent wasn't new. The Democrats said it. They changed the rules, launched filibusters against Hispanic and Black conservative judges. Miguel Estrada, Priscilla Owen, Janice Rogers Brown, blocked, sidelined, ignored. Not for what they did, but for who they were and what they believed. But now, when accountability finally comes knocking, suddenly it's a crisis. Give me a break. This wasn't about revenge. It was about responsibility. You can't preach fairness while swinging the bat, and then cry foul when someone else steps up to the plate. By that point, many viewers saw Omar's interview for what it was, damage control. Her emotional appeals couldn't erase what the nation had witnessed. The fiery insult that echoed through the halls of Congress had already sealed her fate. Meanwhile, Chip Roy's stock skyrocketed. Overnight, he became a symbol of courage and conviction. The man who stood his ground when it mattered most. His speeches went viral. His following surged. Analysts called him the voice of accountability. But for Roy, it wasn't about fame. It was about principle. You can't lead with fear of backlash, he said in one interview. You lead by doing what's right. Those words at home. Across the country, Americans, tired of political theater, felt something they hadn't felt in a long time. Trust. But the fallout inside Congress was seismic. Omar's removal didn't just expose division, it deepened it. Closed-door meetings turned heated as her own colleagues debated whether loyalty had replaced responsibility. The party's unity fractured, not over ideology, but over morality. And beyond Washington, the world was watching. Some foreign leaders called it a sign of strength, proof that even America's most powerful aren't untouchable. Others saw it as a symbol of growing instability. But one thing was clear. The confrontation had evolved from a personal feud into a global conversation about leadership, integrity, and truth. Weeks later, the dust began to settle. Congress took a hard look at itself. Many admitted the obvious. Civility was gone, and politics had turned into performance. In a rare moment of unity, Chip Roy stood again and said, "This shouldn't be about one person. It's about how we conduct ourselves as representatives." His words drew quiet, genuine applause from both sides. As for Ilhan Omar, her future was uncertain. Once a dominant voice in debate, she now fought to stay relevant, her influence fading fast. It was a sobering fall from grace, a reminder that in politics, power can vanish as quickly as it rises. Months later, the clash between Chip Roy and Ilhan Omar still echoed across newsrooms and documentaries. Some called it justice, others vengeance, but no one denied its impact. It changed the tone of Congress forever, because in the end, one truth stood unshaken: words have weight, actions have consequences. And this was the moment America finally remembered both.